Adam Kredo, the piece is Trump State Department unsure why Palestinian terrorists kill Israelis. Officials in the Trump administration State Department are standing by a recent report criticized by Congress that blamed Israel for terror attacks and claimed Palestinians rarely incite violence, telling the Washington Free Beacon that it remains unclear why terrorists engage in violent acts. Adam Kredo, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
This is stunning. Can you explain this?
Partially, to be honest with you, it is stunning. In more than 10 years of covering diplomacy, I've never really seen a answer in response to a question about terrorism quite like this, even under the Obama administration. I think we like to parody them as giving this type of answer, but they never really did on the record. So essentially what we're looking at here is just hours after a Palestinian terrorist stabbed 3 Israelis, killing them, severely wounding one other. I asked the State Department about its recent report on terrorism that said quite explicitly that calls for violence against Israelis, incitement to violence is rare. That's their quote, and that the leadership does not tolerate this. Of course, it's demonstrably false. Congress called them out for it, and I sought to follow up. The answer that came from the State Department is quite confusing. It almost reads as a college thesis, and essentially what they said to me is, look, we don't know what spurs terrorism. It's a combination of complicated factors, and there's no one single pathway to such violence. And what I'm hearing from multiple people I've spoken with, not just advisors to the White House on this issue, but also senior congressional officials, is that this represents something much larger, a State Department gone rogue that is not really following the White House's explicit policy, and this is a very clear example to them of that.
So the White House has one position and the State Department has another position. Is that what you're saying?
Well, very clearly. I think if you'd speak to the White House about this, they'd be clear that the Palestinians incite terrorism. The White House is locked in an effort now. It's not bearing any fruit, but they're locked in an effort to try to get the Palestinian Authority to stop spending U.S. taxpayer aid to pay terrorists who are sitting in Israeli prisons. The Palestinians won't give any ground on the Trump administration has been actually quite outraged behind the scenes over it. We even heard of a yelling match between Trump officials and Palestinian officials last time they spoke. So I think for the State Department to say something like this is wildly different where the White House certainly stands explicitly on the issue. And there's no real reason for that except that the State Department is filled with holdovers from the former Obama administration and has a reputation for going rogue on these types of issues, particularly Israel.
Well, where is the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson? He's got some people over there. How does a report like this leave the State Department, I assume with his signature or at least his imprimatur?
Yeah, well, look, I think that's a very good question and one he should be faced with answering, specifically from officials in the White House. These types of statements that were given to me are not off the cuff. This is approved by people in the press office, approved by the bureaus, and has then trickled down to me. This isn't something that came through some sort of rogue conversation. This is a senior official. So, look, I think it's a very good question for the White House to be saying, what are you guys doing over there? As far as I can tell, Tillerson has really shrugged this issue off, and in some cases, such as what we've seen with Qatar, completely gone rogue on what the White House's policy is.
So we have really a rogue, out-of-control State Department. We have these Obama officials and other leftists who have, secreted their way into the bureaucracy, probably into bureaucratic civil service positions. They cobble together stuff like this, and there's a complete disconnect with what's going on in the State Department and the White House's position. This is why I believe departments like this should face the axe in terms of significant defunding. And every time that's tried, you get people like Lindsey Graham who jump up and say, this will undermine our foreign affairs, our national security. Well, how do we get control of this if we don't do things like this? Now, Peter Roskam is co-chair of the House Republican Israel Caucus. What's he say about all this?
Well, he thinks it's absolutely embarrassing, and according to him, certainly not what the voters put a Trump administration in place for. We had 8 years of open hostility in our relations with Israel, and the voters categorically rejected it in electing Donald Trump. Roscoe points to multiple examples of official Palestinian television, Palestinian officials naming streets after terrorists. They have a Mickey Mouse type character who teaches children how to hate Jews and how to stab Jews. And he thinks that the State Department's characterization would be laughable if it was not so dangerous in terms of our relations with that country.
And the whole country can see it. You go to a site called Palestinian Media Watch, and they have the exact words. They have the television shows. They have all the propaganda, the hate that comes out of the Palestinian Authority, whether it's Fatah or Hamas. It's right there for anybody to read. You don't even have to be a high-level State Department official, do you?
No, not at all. Look, the facts are clear. 181 stabbing attacks on Israelis, 159 shootings, 60 vehicular attacks. That's driving into citizens with cars, and that's killed upwards of 50 Israelis, injured more than 1,000, and that's just in the latest wave of Palestinian violence. Today was supposed to be a day of rage in Jerusalem. Palestinian leaders and factions all across the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian government called on this today, and the earlier violence we saw is one explicit example of that. If the State Department is telling us they don't know what that is fueled by, I think that they have a major problem. It's clearly fueled by a hatred of Jews and a hatred of the State of Israel.
But I want to underscore something else. The positive news, as you point out, is the White House has a very different view, and you have an ambassador in Friedman.
Absolutely.
And you have a gentleman in the name of Greenblatt who really do get a much better sense of what's going on, don't they?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I don't think that they're as naive as the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau in the State Department is. I think that they have a very good sense of when Palestinian leaders meet with them and say, well, look, we don't do incitement. We don't pay terrorist salaries. That's very much a big lie, and that was a flash of tension that we saw in those meetings just several weeks ago between Greenblatt, Friedman, and Palestinian officials, where they said, look, this is nonsense, guys. We're not going to put up with it, and there's no way to foster peace if you don't start first with your hatred of Israel and incitement.
Yeah, I think that's a very positive thing. That is the folks that exist in the White House. But I think the State Department, you're right. The State Department is a hive of anti-Semitism. Adam Kredo, you do great work over there. Keep it up, brother.
Thank you, sir. I truly appreciate it.
Take care. That's the Free Beacon is a great site. There are a number of great sites, but I very much like that site. We'll be right back.